Hi, today we are going to discuss the topic is few mock interview questions on visual force. Let's see. Can you say few visual force controllers and explain? So we have different kind of controllers in visual force framework. One is standard controller, custom controller, controller extensions, standard list controller, standard set controller. Okay. To define standard controller, you have to use the standard controller attribute. To define custom controller, you just need to use the controller attribute, and extensions you have to use extensions attribute. If you talk about standard list controller, there is no specific attribute to define the standard list controller. What we can call it as a standard list controller when you include standard controller along with the record set var attribute, then it is a standard list controller. Standard set controller will be useful for paginations. Okay. Now standard controller provides some basic functionalities of a standard controller. Here the standard controller is the custom object or the standard object. That means in Visualforce framework, for every custom object or standard object, there will be a standard controller with the API name of standard object or the custom object. And when you have to write the custom controller, whenever your standard controller is unable to fulfill your requirement, then you have to go to custom controller. And whenever you have pure custom functionality on the Visualforce page, you can use custom controller. And extensions. Whenever you want to extend the functionality of standard controller or otherwise custom controller without changing the existing controllers, then you can use the extensions. And you can include multiple extensions with the comma separation. So here extension also an apex class, but if you want to make an apex class as the extension class, you have to define a constructor of your apex class with controller instance or the standard controller instance. That means when you want to make an apex class as an extension class for the standard controller, your extension apex class should have a constructor with the standard controller instance as a parameter. Now, when you want to make an extension, an apex class as an extension to the custom controller, then your class or your apex class should have the constructor with the custom controller instance as a parameter in the constructor. This is how you can define an extension. Again, custom controller also is an apex class, but you can't include multiple controllers in the Visualforce page. That is one thing. And you can't include standard controller and custom controller in the same Visualforce page. Okay, this is how it will work. Let's talk about differences between rendered and re-rendered. Rendered will be useful for showing and hiding a particular component in the Visualforce page. Okay, because it has Boolean values. You can set these Boolean values from a controller, from Apex class, and from Visualforce page also. Okay, based on some conditions. And re-render will be useful for redraw or refresh a particular section in the Visualforce page. How can we provide a navigation in the custom controller or extensions methods? So simple. Whenever you want to provide the navigation in the method of custom controller or extension methods, then you have to use a method type as a page reference, and you can use page reference methods for navigating to any page. And now, what is the difference between input field and input text? Let's talk about input text first. So input text is a Visualforce component or Visualforce tag simply, and there you can include custom object fields or otherwise normal Apex class properties. But this input text always is a text box only. It won't give any user interface. If you want, other than the input text box, if you want to design something, or if you want to have a any other design on any other user interface, you have to define. That means input text is just a input text box, and it can hold either normal properties, apex properties, normal apex properties, or otherwise it can hold field of an object. But when you include the field of an object, then it never gives you any user interface based on the field type. For example, if you put pick list field in the input text, for example, account dot type is the pick list from the account object, but input text still, it's an input text box only, input text box only. It's just a text box. It won't give any value. When you give any value, it is ready to save, but it won't generate any user interface based on the field type you defined or you added in the input text. Okay, for example, our account type, it won't give any pick list. But when you come back to input field, when you give input field only useful for adding field in the from the object. That means input field is ready to take the input for the field which is bound to an object, and you can't define normal apex properties or you can't use normal apex properties against the input field. And one more thing, Salesforce generates user interface of a particular field based on the field type when you use the input field. You don't need to write any logic to generate that user interface. That is the main difference between input field and input text. In single line, input field can hold and can be bound to object fields only. It can't hold any other apex properties, but input text can hold both, can be useful for both field of an object, custom field or standard field, and normal apex properties also. But input text never generates any user interface based on field type, but input field can generate user interface based on the field type. Okay, all the best.